Welcome to episode 2 of Talking About Teaching Economics. Today, I'm going to be joined by Eric Kam of Toronto Metropolitan University, and we're going to be chatting a little bit about the Ricardian model of trade, that basic model of trade that turns up in the first few chapters of virtually every introductory economics textbook. So, Eric, when you start thinking about how to approach this, what is it you're trying to get across? What is it you're trying to communicate to students? And sort of why do you think this model turns out virtually everywhere?
I've actually thought about it because I'm one of the people that advocates that the most important lecture of the year is the first and, maybe the second, because you've got to get the students' attention in the first couple of lectures or, it's over. And so I've heard people say, oh, you got to leave, the last lecture has to be the most important, leave them with a lesson, leave them with a, no, I think that's crap. I think it's you got to get them, because if you don't get students in the first few hours that you're teaching, you've lost them.
Yeah.
And so, I think what we've got to do in those 2 hours or 3 hours is show them that economics is everywhere. And, so why are you here? Why are you sitting in the lecture hall? Why should you care about this? I mean, university is a competitive thing. You could be in another course. You could be doing something else, but you're here. Why? Why? And so I think the answer is because the trade model, along with, in conjunction with the two concepts to me, comparative advantage and opportunity cost, I think these are not important economic lessons. I think these are important life lessons.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, as I start to teach them, I don't tell them this to start, but I'm hoping that they're thinking that they can apply specialization, comparative advantage, opportunity cost, give up over get, you name it, yes, into their economic choices. So they're going to make good housekeeping choices, but really these are good life choices. And, I know that they've been teased in the past, especially if they've taken high school economics, but even not, that they've heard even tangentially this idea of best foregone opportunity, or a country should produce in what it does best. And so what I'm trying to do is say, well, let's talk about that, because maybe if a country should produce what it does best, maybe you should do what you do best. And so, long-winded for you, but the answer is I think it's so early in the textbook because it is the ubiquitous topics that you can put into any chapter and really into any action of your life.
Right. No, I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's one of my favorites to teach, in part because it's got such deep roots but such long tendrils into so many different things. I mean, if you want to talk macro, you can talk about, the real genesis of wealth and how we suddenly went from being really, really poor throughout history to really insanely wealthy. Or just the structure of the world. Why are supply chains so long and global? I mean, all of these things I think matter quite a bit. And you're right; it's a great hook to get students engaged in thinking about it and seeing it.
Yeah, and even, you can, and I use a little bit of humor. I know you do too. So, I tell students that, what you're going to learn effectively here is that in economics, size matters. And so I try to go into the difference between something they probably haven't thought about, which is they think that in their life, and they think with money, they think that more is better. More is equivalent to better. You got more, that's better. And I like the trade model because I can say, well, does more really mean better? And I use mathematical examples where, of course, there's an absolute advantage in both goods. And I go, now, what do you think? Just before you know anything, don't flip ahead. Looking at these numbers, what do you think Canada should produce? And then, they both goods. And I go, why? Well, because they can make more of both goods. And I go, right. But more does not necessarily mean better. And that's where you get there. Like, what do you mean more doesn't mean better? More money, better. And I go, yeah, more money, better. But what about if I said to you that economics is about doing things more efficiently? So you use the word better, and I'm going to use the word efficiently. So how do I translate better into efficiently? And then we get into give up over get. And then we get into opportunity cost. Then we get into comparative advantage. And then they go, oh, wait a minute. So Canada makes more hockey sticks, but they make them better in Mexico. And I go, you
Right.
see, that's the light bulb that has to
Yeah.
turn on. And now you're seeing it not for what it is, but what it could be. And that, again, I mean, not to sound like arrogant, but I'm trying to give them things that they can carry through the
Yeah.
whole course and their life. And this is just one more example of it. Well, the answer might not be what it appears at first blush on the screen. And I think that it just gets them going, okay, there's what I see, but what's behind the numbers? And then they go, what's behind the curves? And so I think it's
Yeah.
just, you know, it's a natural to get them to get their brain exercise lifting.
Right. No, I think I couldn't agree more. We're pretty aligned in what we want to do. How do you get there? How do you bring this to the students, and particularly in the large classes that you typically teach?
I exploit my students in a strange way, which is I have all the information going into my classes, and so I know where they're from.
Right.
Yeah, most of them are from Canada, but definitely they don't, you know, that's not where their parents are from. So I tend to rig it. So I don't use the text. Well, I eventually do, but I don't necessarily use the textbook example. Like I have a ton of students from China.
Sure.
So when I do a two-country model, I use two countries that I know I have a lot of students sitting there. Because as soon as I do China and the Philippines, you see those students go, what? What did he say? You know, is he talking about me? And
Yeah.
that's and then I use goods that come from those two countries. Look,
Right.
guns and butter is dead.
Yeah.
The Canada, the USA, it's been done. It's boring. So it's a bit of a trick of the trade that I try to use countries where I know people are from or their ancestry is from, goods that they will know. And actually, I may have told you this story, but I learned this lesson once stupidly, which is I gave a lecture, a guest lecture, and I forget the good I used. I used a good. I don't remember what it was, just some inane commodity.
Sure.
And after the class, a couple students came to me and said, what? Oh, it was margarine. And they came to me and they said, what is that? And I go, what do you mean, what is margarine? And they go, well, we're from here. We never heard of it. And I went, oh, no.
Oh, wow.
Oh, crap. There's equity, diversity, and inclusion right there. And I
Writ
just
large.
stepped on it. So I do just a little bit of research and I find some goods indigenous to where they come from. And sometimes it's even fun because some of the Canadian students won't know it. Like if you use Australia and you use Vegemite, and then the Canadian students are like, what the hell's Vegemite? And then the Australian students are like, you don't know what Vegemite is? And it's just a way of bringing, you know, you bring the group together. And I say to some Australian student, stand up. Right. And I bring them the microphone, tell them what Vegemite is. And don't tell them the truth, which is it tastes like garbage. Right. And they laugh. But it's a way of just kind of getting this 500 people group to feel a little bit smaller.
You're right.
So again, countries where people come from, goods where people come from. I make sure that one country has a comparative advantage in one and one has it in the other. So it doesn't look like I'm playing favorites or, you know, the students from one part of the world say, what about us? So again, just little tricks of the trade. Look, you know, you can't make everything super fancy, you know. You can't take the basic Ricardian model and, you know, turn it into an endogenous growth model, although it'd be fun. But so I try to keep it simple. I try to keep it because again, they're learning this on the outer end, their second lecture in economics, right? And so they're just getting their feet wet. And if they're like your students, they're mathophobic. Yeah. So the first time they see a number, they have a bit of a stroke. So I keep it really simple. I keep the numbers simple, obviously super divisible, and I go like that. As soon as you use their countries and their products, they listen a little more intently. So I don't know if that's a trick. Yeah, it makes it personal. They internalize it, and and by the way, it never hurts on the student ratings.
No, I mean, Canadians are horrible for this in American media. It's like, oh, they suddenly mentioned us. I mean, like Deadpool being from Regina is a bit of a, you know, suddenly everybody in Regina pays attention to Deadpool.
And by the way, speaking of Regina, if I can, I'll throw in as many sports analogies as I can. I tell them that I used to work for the Canadian Football League. and then their first response is there's a Canadian Football League. And so sometimes for goods, we'll use teams and
Right.
you
Oh,
know,
that's
things
a neat
like that.
angle. Yeah.
So anything, anything that I can do that they
Mhm.
like stuff. I mean, they're not that much different than us. We know when a celebrity walks by, or,
Yeah.
the first time I was in New York City and I walked by Radio City Music Hall and I went, oh my God, that's Radio City Music Hall.
Mhm.
Well, they have that too. They have stars in their eyes when countries they know, goods they know,
Mhm.
products they know, celebrities they know,
Yeah.
things like that. Again, this is a small thing, but when in some models, when I have, let's say, willingness to pay or consumer surplus, and you have to put four people's names, I inevitably use the members of the Red Hot Chili Peppers,
Okay.
or some group like that,
Right.
and then I go, by the way, who are these people? And someone whips up their hand and I go, that's the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And then again, right? That just it's
Yeah.
now I used to use, like, George, Ringo, but they've never heard of the Beatles. So
Yeah.
I have to use their music and their
Yeah.
pop culture, but it really doesn't hurt.
No, I always used to use the Simpsons, because when I started teaching, that was a great touchstone. Everybody knew what that was, or almost everybody knew what that was. And about 10, 15 years ago, it stopped landing. So, got to do something else. I'll pick students, and I'll make it about them specifically, and get them picking on their buddy and that kind of thing, which is also a lot of fun. Just to be really clear, so you are going through in class, you're going through a full numeric example, calculating the opportunity cost, and figuring out absolute and comparative advantage, all that kind of thing. So that's sort of what's going on around these examples and references.
And in fact, more than once.
Mhm.
I know that we have scarce time, and scarcity is one of the first things you talk about. I do a lecture, a 2 and change hour lecture on opportunity cost and
Mhm.
comparative advantage. And we'll do it. And then I always say, how many people think we should do it again? Every arm goes up.
Yeah.
We do it again, different numbers, different goods, different countries. And then I show it on a PPF. And then I show them, so many parts of this course, you're going to be able to use a table, or you're going to be able to use a curve.
Mhm.
And they like the duality. They like being able to, I leave it all on the board so they can see, you see this big table with lots of numbers. I think it's easier to use this curve,
Mhm.
but maybe you don't. So, and I tell them, I don't care which method you can
Doesn't
use.
matter.
If you can take the slope here, you can take the slope here. I don't care. So I actually, it's funny that we're talking about this, because
Mhm.
this probably flies in the face of a lot of people who feel that their time is limited. In these topics, comparative advantage, opportunity cost, demand, supply, I don't think I'm limited, because like I
Mhm.
say, if I don't get to oil and
Yeah.
externalities or the labor market, I don't care. They'll
Yeah.
catch that eventually. If they don't get
Yeah.
this stuff, then that stuff is useless anyway.
Mhm.
So mathematical examples, and we start from the beginning. I don't just put up an example. I know what countries are we going to do, and we write them up
Yeah.
there, and what goods are we going to do, and then we pick numbers. I rig the numbers, of course, because I want them
Mhm.
to divide, blah blah blah. But yes, there is no such thing for me in that as too much time. I'll
Mhm.
do it, and I'll do it again. And if they still look like they've seen a ghost, hell, I'll do it again.
Just 3 times, and whatever. Yeah, let's get it done. Because again, we're really aligned on this, because when you look at some of the later topics, if they've got the foundation, even if you don't cover it in your class, if they've got the foundation, if they've figured that out, how long is it going to take them to figure out that application? Because a lot of say labor market stuff is application of those first few chapters.
Absolutely. And I will sometimes send them. I'll end the class and say, here's one I did. Here it is.
Mhm.
Take it home, give it a try.
Mhm.
And if you think you're having, and I'll say in a couple of days, I'll send you the answer. And if you don't get the answer, email me or email the TAs, and you can go over why you don't get the answer.
Right.
But these to me, these are the bedrock topics.
Oh yeah.
And I've never, ever for the life of me understood why anybody wants to whiz through this to get to anything else. This is it. I mean,
Mhm.
and like I say, and then when you can tell when the light turns on, and it happens twice. It happens when they when they get the pure mathematical manipulation of the thing,
Right.
they can go from the absolute advantage to the comparative advantage. But it really turns on when they start asking you, well, what about? And
Yeah.
then I know in my mind, they're applying this to other things.
They're starting to play with the toy.
Right. That's exactly right. And they're starting to go, this is cool. Where else can I use this?
Mhm.
And I mean, I know, and I'm going to way jump ahead, but when you teach them prisoner's dilemma,
Mhm.
I think that's the best example where they go, wait a minute, I can apply this to throwing bombs into countries. And I go, yeah, and they do. But long before you get there, that light bulb has to turn on. And
Mhm.
that's why I sound like a broken record. Not that our students know what that is, but comparative
Oh,
advantage,
vinyl's popular again.
it is coming back. Comparative advantage and opportunity cost. There is no too much time. They've got to
Mhm.
get this down,
They're so
or the rest of it is
fundamental.
useless.
How do you assess this material?
A few ways. I use a lot of assessments. I use the model that Avi Cohen taught me about. Use more assessments, but have them worth less.
Mhm.
So
High frequency, low stake.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I started, first of all, as a student, I had a midterm worth 50 and a final worth 50.
Mhm.
And I remind Avi of that because when I was in his class, that caused a great amount of stress and anxiety. But it's true. If you want to reduce stress and anxiety,
Mhm.
give them lower stakes things and give them more of them. So outside of the classroom, I encourage them. I use my lab. I use Pearson, and
Mhm.
I absolutely encourage them to go to my lab, where I give a my lab quiz per chapter,
Okay.
and I throw on there the kitchen sink. I mean, I just throw on almost every question
Right.
because I only make the my labs in total about 10% of their grade, maybe 15. And I tell them in that Allen Iverson way, it's just practice. It's not the game, it's
Right.
practice. And so they really, and I tell them like, that's where you're going to get your practice, right? I mean, I
Mhm.
can send you lots of examples, but by going to my lab, by using the study plan, by doing the weekly quiz, that's where you're going to get your examples. Plus now, we have the luxury of, and I don't like doing this because it's like generic teaching, but I do tell my students, listen, if you need more examples, Google comparative advantage
Yeah.
and you'll find millions of examples,
Exactly.
and keep running that play until you get it right, because eventually you
Mhm.
will get it right. And if you really listen, after 2 or 3 times, if you don't get it, email me and I'll work through it with you.
Yeah.
I have no problem having a Zoom call like this with a student
Mhm.
or a group of students to have them learn it. I like them to have done a lot of practice before that midterm.
Yeah. Well, it shouldn't be a surprise. Nothing that happens on a midterm or a final should really be a surprise. Setting aside that what I call a 90% question, right? Where you've got, well, okay, I'm gonna push you a bit. Maybe that's a bonus question or something else, but I don't like surprises. I don't think that's what we want to be doing at this level. Um,
Right, right. But I also believe, and again, so some people disagree with this, but
mhm.
students, first of all, because of the scarcity of their time, I don't know your demographic. My students are not wealthy. Most of them work.
Mhm.
And so I can't inundate them with work that's worth nothing.
Yeah,
They
that's
don't have
right.
the time. They don't have the time and they just can't. And I'm kidding myself to think that they're going to, they're not me in 1986 when
Right.
if I got 25 questions, I would do all 25 even if it was
Mhm.
worth nothing. They can't do it. So you have to incentivize it. So that's why I really use extensively the toys and tools that come with the Pearson products,
Yeah.
because I like my lab a lot. I like the study
Mhm.
plan a lot. And it gives them basically, an infinite number of examples to
Yeah.
work through.
Oh yeah.
And but if that's really not enough, then again, I have no problem with creating new examples or just sending them off to Google and saying,
Yeah.
do anything you want. Any practice is better than no practice. I give them I actually, it's funny, I one of the new things I do is I give my students a practice midterm before the midterm,
Okay.
but I make it worth something, but very little,
Yeah.
just so they run through it. And so to your point now, because I think it's a really good one, there really shouldn't be any surprises on the midterm
Mhm.
because they've done a practice midterm that's worth 3%,
Yeah.
right? I don't care if they get the whole damn thing wrong. I'm grading it on did you do it or not.
Mhm.
And by giving them the 3%, 2.5%, they do it. They mostly
Yeah.
do
It's
it.
enough of a cookie.
It's enough of a cookie. And so to me, it's practice, practice,
Mhm.
practice,
Yeah.
right? It's the same way you get to Carnegie Hall. But again, I know a lot of people in other schools. Some of you, we have friends, and they're at Western and Queens.
Mhm.
And, God bless them at Western and Queens, students don't have jobs. Most students don't have jobs.
Yeah.
So they'll do practice questions all night.
Mhm.
I have to make it worth their while, because I
Yeah.
know, sadly, that their time in class and out of class is becoming a residual of their day after they
Mhm.
work, after their family responsibilities,
Yeah.
after they help grandma and grandpa or take their little brothers to school. So I have to make it worth something, or I'm just wasting their time and mine.
Yeah. And it's part of that, they're being good economists, right? They're allocating their time in response to incentives. And, we shouldn't be grumpy about that. We should be
I'm
celebrating them for that.
Well, I say that, and I get into a lot of trouble at conferences, none that you've been to yet, but I've had people come up to me after class and go, you make a great story, but your story doesn't work in reality. And really, this is exactly what they're arguing. They're saying, I tell my students that my course is the most important course, and there's no course as hard as first year economics. Look beside you, that person's going to fail. And,
Right.
and I'm going, you are so beyond outdated. And worse than that, you have so missed the boat on who is sitting in your lecture hall, because
Mhm.
you think you're sitting in your lecture hall.
Right.
Well, I learned a long time ago, especially at Toronto Metropolitan,
Mhm.
I'm not sitting in that lecture hall. Those are not me at 19 years old.
Right.
They're not me. They're not a Jewish kid from Toronto whose parents said, "We'll take care of money, you study."
Yeah.
That is not my students.
No. Well, here's a classic example. It's an older movie, it's an older reference right now. I've actually played it in class. That Alec Baldwin scene from Glengarry Glen Ross. Have you seen that movie? Yeah.
Yeah.
There are two responses to that scene. And I'm a sports guy. I played sports growing up, and that whole coaching. Coach comes in and kicks the garbage can, and tells you you're embarrassing and all that other crap. There are two types of people. There are those that are really motivated by that kind of thing. That look left, look right. Those people won't be here, and there are other people that just don't deal with that very well, for a huge number of reasons, many of them legitimate. um, and I think the proportion of people in at least my classroom, it sounds like your classroom as well, are not of that first type to respond well to that, always be closing kind of speech. Instead, it's
No, because Jason, you know what they're getting at home? They are getting not wealthy parents who are stretching themselves to the absolute limit just to send them to university. Do you think they want to hear that their odds of failing are pretty high?
mm, right. It
You're
becomes a why try. It's like, let's spend the time and don't stretch. Don't put yourself out. Don't expose yourself to the financial risk.
right. And in fact, I don't tend to lie to my students, but I do once or twice in a term lie to them. And I'll tell you one thing I do lie, which is we're getting far away from Ricardo.
No, that's fine.
Except he was Jewish, so there was a. But anyway, when they ask me how many people fail this course, I lie, and I tell them, you know what? Last year, out of 500 students, 4 or 5 fail, and they all go, "That's it?" And I go, "Passing this class is not the goal. The
Right.
goal is to understand. The goal is to
Mm,
learn, and now more than that, fail sadly. But
yeah.
but what I'm telling them is, I hope you're not sitting there going, my goal is not to fail, because odds are you're not going to fail.
Hmm.
And
If
I
you
and I
Yeah.
don't know if that helps, but it can't hurt.
Well, and I have this. I don't downplay the numbers. I'll tell them honestly. Usually, it's about 15-20% fail the class, but I can tell you exactly what happens to the overwhelming majority of them. They don't try,
Right.
right? And I said, oh, look, I don't grade on a curve. If you all get A pluses, you all get A pluses. If you all get Fs, you all get Fs, right? I'm going to tell you where the bar is. I'm going to see whether or not you jump over it. And I'll help you practice jumping, and I might even shove you on a few practice runs here. But yeah, I like you. It's like, no, here we go. I'm not out to get you, right? And I think that's really important in the building of the trust and that kind of thing. And to build on this and just try and bring us back back to our topic, what is it with the Ricardian model that you find really, where do students get stuck? Where do they get into trouble?
They panic.
Okay.
They are so severely mathophobic that I have seen students trip on dividing 10 divided by 5 or 5 divided by 10.
Right.
And I can't, you have to keep your wits about you,
Mhm.
because what you want to do is say, what the hell is the matter with you? Right. But we're
You
old
can't
enough.
do that.
We're old enough to know what's the matter. The matter
Yeah.
is they're nervous.
Mhm.
They're first year students. They are 18 years old. And you put all of that sometimes in a mix, and you get a student that really isn't thinking straight. And so for me, it's the math. And again, someone would laugh and go, that's not math. Putting whole numbers in 4 squares and having them divide them isn't math. Yeah, it's math if you're young and you're nervous.
Yeah, it's arithmetic, and arithmetic can trip you up.
That's right. That's right. And my way, again, now bringing back to what I said before, practice, practice, practice. The only way you're going to get a little bit of that mathophobia out of your genes is to keep doing it until it becomes almost rote.
Yeah.
And then, all you have to do is make sure, did I do my math right?
Right.
So at first it's a discombobulation of what do I do? What do I do? Then they go, okay, I know what I got to do. I divide corn by popcorn or something like that. Right. And then once you get that higher level order of thinking, then it's, did I get the numbers right?
Right.
And I just want to get them to the point where, did I get the numbers right? Because that's actually the easiest thing to fix.
Oh yeah, that calculator does that for you. But so on that front, one of the things I do is I really go after the units and have them know you've got to get the units right. Because if they get the units, it's popcorn per unit corn or whatever, or in my classes it would probably be popcorn over bourbon. Right. And it would be, we got to know which one's which, and that tells you what to divide. Right. And
yes.
And
Yeah,
that's that little
point.
link back in, is going, knowing what number goes on the top and what number. And you did give over get, or you mentioned that earlier, and I use exactly the technique, but I've found that focusing on the units helps them to really understand what it is they found, but also what math to do.
That's actually a super good point. I'm not sure I've ever stressed that. I mean, I think I do it without thinking. But see, that's one of the pitfalls of this profession, is we do sometimes not think, and we do sometimes take many things for granted that they don't. And I mean, that's something, now that you've said it, now I'm going to start to do it, because that's a good point. I think I've just assumed that was implicitly understood, and maybe it's not. So
it hasn't been my experience that it's implicitly understood, and that those units make a huge difference. And I think one of the things I found, it allows them to focus on something other than the arithmetic. Right. And
so like, you would say, I mean, I would turn it into humor and say, if they do it wrong, and say, you often measure couches in pounds. Things like that. There's really, I never thought of that. Actually, I thank you for that. Because I'm always, listen, we're all just trying to get better at this, right?
Oh yeah. And there's everybody I talk to, I'm taking little notes, and I'm going to focus on your more is not better piece. I think that's brilliant. One of the other things I've been doing with this more and more lately, and I want to kick this around with you and see what you thought of it, is I've been using the trade model as sort of a bridge to what in the Hubbard book is chapter 3, which is demand and supply and price formation. So one of the things I try and end with when I'm doing this material, and I may be too much, but having them identify a price at which a mutually beneficial trade can occur. And that's where I try to leave it and say, okay, well, where in this space are we going to end up? And I've had some luck. It takes a lot of time, and I'm not 100% convinced it's the right piece at the right time.
No, I don't think. No, I think it's a good idea. I mean, I like doing things like that too. Now they find that. So now we're going to delve into, you say, when they have trouble. Yeah, they have. I'm glad you brought that up. They have a lot of trouble with the pre and post trade.
Yeah.
This is a tough idea for them. I'm glad you mentioned this. I don't know why I forgot it. Yeah. So they're actually fairly mobile, fairly nimble, as much as I don't like that term, at figuring out who has a comparative advantage. That then, what do we trade? Getting to show them both in a table or on a curve that trade makes you better off.
Yeah,
This is very challenging.
it can be. Yeah.
Yeah, and I take this very seriously because if you want to go back to 1986, I didn't get it the first time through either.
No.
I didn't get why did you trade that many units? Why did you get that many units back? That for me was something that I had to learn. So I always have a special sympathy when I do teach that. And the way that I like to do it is to rig the numbers, and maybe a lot of people do this, I don't know. I've been using Avi's textbook and he does this, is that in both goods, after trade, you have the same amount of one good and more of the other. And so you're able to say, you see, you're no worse off here, but you're better off here.
Yeah.
And that's better off.
Yeah.
And so I like to use that as a between the goalposts, as you put it, to show them that it doesn't necessarily mean you get more of both goods, but you can definitely get the same amount of good A and get more of good B, and then both countries are better off.
Yeah.
But yes, I'm glad you brought that up. Students have a big problem with that. And I always tell them again, straight out, yeah, me too. Didn't totally get this the first time through the whole pre and post trade. And again, I'm again repeating myself, lots of examples, lots of practice, lots of time, and then just and then they tend to get it. But that is, if you go through the tests and you look at some of the data, that is a question students tend to get wrong. So you got to spend a little bit more time on it, especially before I do a cumulative final. And when you go back and say, all right, you know what we're going to do next week? We're just going to do topics that you want to review. Yeah. I mean, I don't like when students go, can we review the whole course? And I go, I can't trivialize my whole course in 2 hours.
Yeah. No, that's not going to work out very well.
But we can definitely do the topics that really freaked you out. That's always one of them. That is always, pre and post trade is always one of them, both in a table form and on the curve. And I like the textbook treatment of it. I tend to stick to it. Because that's one of the things that they need a security blanket of knowing, that's in my book.
Yeah, and knowing that this is cut and dry, and this is something I can master because it is a well-defined problem.
Yes. Yeah. But it's it is tough. And it's actually, here's another little trick of the trade that I do. And it's painful on my part, but it actually pays off huge. And I'm telling, when I finish comparative advantage, I sit down at home and I will gladly send it to you. You can gladly give it to your students. A painful step-by-step.
A cookbook.
Pre-trade.
Yep.
What's the comparative advantage? When you have a comparative advantage, what should this country do? It should produce 0 of this and all of this. Then this country should do 0 of that and all of that. Now let's trade. And Jason, it's painful.
Yeah. Oh no. I mean, I've written cookbooks for this and for other things for students, and it is, here's the recipe, right? And the recipe is masterable, and that's so I think the other thing I think we should make explicit here in our conversation is we're talking about doing these models as linear examples. Absolutely. Constant opportunity cost.
Absolutely.
Right? So you get the total complete specialization. I talk about incomplete specialization as an extension, but I don't do it.
Oh yeah, sure. I like this. Listen, anytime, and this goes for the whole course. Anytime that we draw a straight line, I tell them that it can be a curve.
Oh yeah.
And I explain what that means. Whether it's labor isn't divisible equally. Yeah. Or any other inequality that gives you a not straight line. But oh my God, these are fundamentals, and you have to start with linear. And
absolutely. You don't need the complication.
No, this is not the area you complicate.
Yeah.
This is not the area that you start with. Eventually, if the course lasts long enough, and mine doesn't, you'll get to like a kink demand curve. But oh no. These are nice, easily divisible numbers, and Yeah, and so yeah, so that makes that cookbook that I do, I really like showing them, the whole pre and post, and we started
Mhm.
with this, and we finished with this, we traded this, and it's tough, and I do ask them to work through it,
Mhm.
just like I tell them, just like because I never, it's one of the things I force myself to do as an instructor is I actually delete it so that the next year I have to do it again
Right.
to make sure I get it right. Um,
That's worth doing.
yeah, it is worth doing. And so,
Yeah.
because oh God, there's nothing worse than giving them that thing and it's wrong. And then you've shown 500 students how to do it wrong, and that's what they learn.
Yeah.
So I do pre-post myself, and I think it's nice. And yeah, I beg them, can't make them do it, but I beg them to work through it. And
Mhm.
and they do. Well, most of them do. And I'll tell you how I know they do, because I get a lot of emails saying, okay, I get this, but where'd you get this?
Where did this number come from? Yeah.
Where'd that number come from? And you know what it is inevitably? It is inevitably the answer to, all right, you see that because Canada specializes in hockey sticks, they're going to make zero bread. Okay. Now what I'm doing is I'm taking some bread over to the hockey sticks. And that's that
Mm.
intermediate step of, okay, so why did you give them that many?
Right.
And this is where you have to be slow. You go, I didn't have to give them that many. I'm giving them that many.
Yeah. It's arbitrary.
It's arbitrary,
Yeah.
but here's why I like it. Because again, when you go to the end, you'll see Canada makes the exact same amount of hockey sticks,
Mhm.
but suddenly has more bread when they didn't make any bread.
That's right.
Canada made no bread, and yet they've got more bread than they had when they started, or no less.
Right.
And what were your resources? Zero.
Yeah. And well, that's where, it's that question that prompted me to start doing the price formation piece, where okay, we the price has to be between this and this
Yeah.
as a setup for the transition to chapter 3. And that's one of those things I'm still playing with and sorting through and trying to find where it works or how it works best, and if it's worth the time. I get a lot of eyebrows coming out going, oh, that's really neat, and it sets up the motivation for a supply curve and a demand curve, I think, nicely. So
It does, but you're right that it's funny. I would have thought, if I had never, dropped from another planet to teach this stuff, I'd have thought that putting prices to things would make things more relatable and easier. It's not.
it's not obvious.
They're better with physical goods.
Yeah, and I'm just setting up what's the most they would give up for, and the
Right.
most they would pay. I'm just trying to put boundary conditions
Yeah.
on that trade ratio, because it comes out of that question that I found really frustrating, and saying, oh, it's just arbitrary. Well, could it be this? And then you have to go, no, it couldn't be that number, right? Because that's outside the bounds.
Yeah, and you know what? And then you have a lot of fun when you do a PPF.
Mhm.
Whether you do it before or after, there's always the point that's unattainable and inefficient.
Yep.
And you show them, there's your unattainable and inefficient right there. That price doesn't work.
Yeah.
And I tell them, there's no there. You can't get there from here. Right. And so, it doesn't matter if you do the PPF one first or whatever, is you're showing them that there's your unattainable.
Yeah.
And if it's unattainable, efficiency isn't even a question one has to ask. So it first has to be attainable before we even turn to this efficiency question. And again, they tend to cling to, but I think your point's very well taken. The prices of anything. Introducing prices blows people away when they very first see it. And again, I would have thought where they go, okay, price makes sense. When you teach demand and supply, like, the things that shift the demand supply curve, inevitably the things that shift the supply curve are much harder. And I tell them, yeah, because you don't think like suppliers.
No.
Very few of you own your own business. So price to you is something that you pay, not something that you receive. I think this is of the same ilk.
Yeah, I think it's foreign. I did have one other topic I wanted to bring up before we wrap up. And this is something I've added and might be useful to others. I found the Ricardian trade model provides an excellent opportunity to point out that there's value in diversity, right? Because one of the wrinkles is, what's the value of trading with somebody who's identical to me, right?
Oh,
that
sure.
you need difference in order for trade to work. And the bigger the difference is, the bigger the gains. And that's something a lot of students kind of really have started to latch onto in an interesting way.
There's yes. I mean, the broad answer is yes.
Mhm.
I like that approach. I like doing that as well. I've even been known, believe it or not, in first year to photocopy a few pages of Ricardo's classic book
Mhm.
and give it to them.
Yeah.
And ask them to read it, because in the beginning they read this very, I mean, obviously poorly written in a sense to their English.
Right.
They go, what does this have to do with anything? And then I tell them, this is the roots of trade.
Yeah.
This is the roots of comparative advantage.
This is where this stuff started.
This is where it all began. And you got to be real sharp to have come up with this,
Yeah.
And so so to your point, I kind of even go back and I say, okay, here's where I start, because I think history of economic thought's fascinating.
Yeah.
So I go back and I say, here's the lectures on taxation, and here's where it comes from. And then, I move into what you're talking about differences and heterogeneity.
Yeah.
And the more heterogeneity, the better. Yeah, me too. I don't think so. I'm not telling you what you're doing is 100% how I do it too. I even try to take one more step back.
Okay.
And say, this is what Ricardo tripped and stumbled upon.
Yeah.
Maybe he figured out the more different we are, the better that I am at producing one good and you're producing at one good. Well, that's a good thing, because wouldn't life be boring if we all stood on the same side of the boat? We'd tip it.
Yeah, exactly.
And so all we're doing here, I tell them, you've been taught in your life that exploitation is a bad word. Well, not if you're exploiting what you do best.
Mm-hmm.
That's not exploitation at all.
Oh, okay. That's a neat bit of something.
Right? It's fundamental. You're not exploiting. Okay, if you want to use the term, you call it exploiting. I call it cultivating. I call it bringing to the surface the whole idea that we are a social science. We are not in the business school at TMU. We are a social science. This is about behavior. This is about people, and no two people are alike. And that's why this model works.
And that's a damn good thing.
And that's a damn good thing, because I tell them, we all stand on the same side of the boat. Boat's going to tip.
Goes over. So I think, to wrap it up, what advice would you give to a brand new instructor approaching this material?
It almost sounds philosophical, but it's when I do new faculty orientation every year, I beg new faculty. It almost sounds bad, but I don't care. You're not as good as you think you are. I know you're just out of the PhD program. Your parents made you a party. You got that fancy doctor title and you're feeling pretty good about yourself. But learning and teaching are really different things. And because you've learned it, God did not come down from Mount Sinai and bestow upon you his or her gift of education. So I would beg you to remember what it was like as an undergrad when something confused you, and go into that with that type of patience and that air of non-invincibility. And when your students inevitably don't get it, I've seen what happens when professors come back with, I don't understand what you're not getting. This is trivial.
Right.
You and I had a professor at our former institution that used to say, this is trivial. And when Martin Osborne called something trivial, it meant you're not going to get it for the love of God, because it's so hard, it's beyond you.
Yeah.
Don't do that. Learn from Professor Osborne. He taught me a lot, some of how to teach, some of how not to teach. And I'm sure I teach lots of people little bits about how not to teach. So I would tell new faculty members, slowly, remember what it's like to not understand something, because everybody didn't understand something.
Yeah.
And just be cognizant of the fact that somebody that you think this was simple, it went way over their head. Teach to that student in the beginning.
Yeah.
And then you'll be fine. But really, this hubris, arrogance, there's a time and a place, but it's not in your first year lecture when you're in front of 500 students and they're scared.
Yeah. Excellent advice. My guest today has been Eric Kam from Toronto Metropolitan University.